Welcome back from RSA. This week we start with the news. 2 weeks of news to catch up on. We've got 16 funding stories, 4 M&A stories. Cybereason prunes its valuation a lot. First Republic Bank seized by FDIC. Ransomware is irrelevant. Sun Tzu hates Infosec. AI trends. Kevin Mandia's 7 tips for defense. How much time should we spend automating tasks? Then we've got 6 micro interviews to share that were broadcast live from RSA last week. A bunch of the hosts all took turns doing micro interviews. We had a good time. And these are 15-minute interviews with different individuals, companies that we talked to in Broadcast Alley during the event. The first of those is Christopher Krugel from VMware, who's going to be discussing lateral movement. Teresa Lanowitz from AT&T Business talks 5G and the edge ecosystem. Vinay Anand from NetSpy talks external attack surface management. Nick Biancini from Cisco Talos talks about their new cybersecurity readiness index. Sounds interesting. Jeff Bibby from OpenText Cybersecurity talks building a powerhouse cybersecurity portfolio. Randy Watkins from Critical Start talks the drivers for managed detection and response, otherwise known as MDR. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
When organizations face poor web performance, challenges building modern applications at scale, or need to reduce operational and development costs, they turn to Fastly. Fastly's distributed edge network means your business can unleash its growth potential without worrying about scaling your infrastructure, whether for growth of users, transaction volume, or geographic expansion. Get the speed, security, and edge cloud innovation you need to deliver profitable and engaging experiences. Visit securityweekly.com/Fastly for more information or to speak to an expert. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly. Security Weekly community, our teams from Security Weekly and SC Media were on site at RSA Conference 2023, delivering in-depth reporting, analysis, and interviews from the conference. If you're unable to join us in person or didn't manage to catch our video live stream from Broadcast Alley, access all of our RSA 2023 coverage, including video interviews with leaders from the community. Visit securityweekly.com/RSAC. And if you're thinking, hey, that's weird, doesn't he usually do the announcement after he does the intro and introduces the co-host? Yeah, good catch. I messed that up. So let me try that again. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy World Password Day. This is episode 316, recorded on Thursday, May 4th, 2023. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the Czar of Zero Trust, the Captain of Content, Katie Teitler. How you doing, Katie?
I'm well. You sound like you might have picked up a little bit of a cold at RSA last week.
Yeah, I don't know what it was. I was at a house. We were having a private event at a house there, and I thought maybe I was allergic to the dog. But even after leaving, like the sinus thing just kind of stuck with me. So I don't know if it was my allergies led to like a sinus infection that just kind of followed me around, but it's still causing me problems. Yeah, so I don't know. It could have been a cold, maybe. Also joining us is the Baron of Bloodhound, the Pirate King of PowerShell, Sean Metcalf. How are you doing, Sean? We haven't seen you in a bit.
Yeah, I'm doing good. Doing the travel thing, getting out and talking with customers. Running a company involves a lot of customer interaction, being at conferences, traveling around, chatting with people, seeing people. Although I can happily say that I did take some vacation time last month. This month is another busy month of travel, heading out to Microsoft headquarters next week, and then closing out the month in Ireland besides Dublin. So, oh darn, I get to go to Ireland. So we're looking forward to that.
I have never been to the only part of Washington State I've ever been to is Spokane, because I had a client in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. So I've never actually been to like Portland, Seattle, that whole area. I've never been to in the Pacific Northwest.
I've been there a few times, and I reported to my sister-in-law years ago when I was there that I did not see any sparkly vampires, so they were not at least present outside of the Seattle Redmond area.
But did you visit any baseball fields?
I did not.
That's where they're hanging out. I've also not been. I'm doubly envious of you.
Oh, you got to go to Ireland. It's beautiful. Every shade of green possible, imaginable, you can see in Ireland. And you got to get outside Dublin, the main city, and just see the countryside, especially the south and the southwest areas. It's incredibly beautiful and just very natural. And it's like being a fairy tale. Lord of the Rings was filmed in New Zealand, but it could have been filmed in Ireland as well. I mean, it's very similar, just incredibly beautiful.
I remember one day I was just like, you ever have those days where you're just looking at houses that you're not going to buy, just exploring them? And just exploring castles you could buy for less than $100,000 in Ireland. And I was like, I don't know what I would do with it, but like owning a castle in Ireland would be pretty cool.
Oh, great. Thanks. Now I got something else to put on my bucket list there, Adrian. I just wrote that down. Buy a castle in Ireland.
Wouldn't mind you mentioned cruise for me while you're there.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'll take a look. But you reminded me, World Password Day is today. Last night I was setting up a new computer for my sister-in-law, and I had set up a new account for her on it. And I was like, here's your password. And she's looking at it and goes, okay, a symbol, letters, numbers, another symbol, numbers. She's like, what is going on here? I said, this is to make sure you actually don't get hacked. I think you'll be fine with this. Then we set up MFA. We set up the passwordless authentication. I got her all set up with it, and she's just like, okay, this is great. I can use my fingerprint. I can log in just with my phone without having to actually enter that password. So I think it's getting better slowly, but I think a lot of the issues are people just aren't aware of what you can do with this technology that we have now, like with FIDO2 backing it up. And certainly with the Microsoft Windows 11 platform, it makes it a lot easier to be able to authenticate without having to use a password, although realistically, we also have passwords.
You talking about Windows Hello?
Yes.
Yeah. No, we're definitely moving in the right direction. Getting rid of passwords, definitely a good thing. Had a chat about on Macs. They've got pass keys, which is basically like there's an ability to replace passwords on websites with pass keys now. I haven't actually done it because I use a lot more than just Macs. On a daily basis, I use iOS, Mac OS, Linux, Windows 11, and Android, and Fedora 38 or whatever it is now.
That sounds to me like Dante's 7 levels of hell, having to switch between multiple operating systems. No, thank you.
I got one password in all of them, and it pretty much
That's
works
great.
the same. Yeah, and there's some other password managers also that do a great job with cross-platform syncing and generally the same experience, regardless of where you're using it. So kudos to the password managers out there, keeping my life from being a living hell.
Absolutely.
And with that, let's get into the, speaking of living hell, we've 42 stories to discuss this week. And roughly 40 minutes to do it in. We might go over a little bit this week, but if you missed it in the intro, the reason why we're doing the news first is we don't have any interviews this week because we are going to rebroadcast some of the micro interviews we did from RSA last week, which was a lot of fun. I liked recording interviews in Broadcast Alley. You're sitting in West Moscone, you got everybody wandering around, and just each one's 15 minutes, so you're just kind of done and off to the next one. But it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to do those. All right, so tons of funding here. Notably, to me, one of the most notable things is we've got a few Series C here. We haven't seen many raises for mid-stage startups. So I'm kind of taking that as a positive sign.
So Adrian, I'm a bit new to the different series. What is an A versus a B versus a C?
Yeah, so if you're a startup and you're going to go the venture capital route, your first raise is called seed, and typically that's every now and then we see a crazy seed, but typically it's less than $10 million. It's 10 million or less these days for a cybersecurity company. And you're handing off and there's certain VCs that will do specifically seed funding or early stage funding. They only do maybe seed, Series A, Series B. So Tyler, one of our co-hosts, is an angel investor. You'll typically see individual investors and angel investors more often in early stage rounds. And I think you're typically handing off a larger portion of ownership in those rounds. But we're already at the limit of my experience. I've never been directly involved in a round of funding myself, or had to read term sheets directly myself. And then it just kind of goes through the alphabet as you raise. Some companies get to Series C and they get acquired, or typically we don't see companies going IPO after just 3 rounds. Typically that's further on into E, F, and G before you'll see a company IPO and become a public company. So those are what we call exits. Like your exit's going to be you go IPO, you get acquired by a bigger company, either another vendor or a private equity company if you can't find another vendor to buy you, or you have a bad exit and your assets get acquired, or you just go under and you file for bankruptcy,
or you get devalued, right?
Or so that's where we get into down rounds, and I'm not sure if there's a term for getting a lower valuation than your previous valuation. So I called it dehorning. So
dehorning the unicorn.
So I asked for a graphic to be created for this since it's come up, and we might as well jump right to Cybereason. So what happened to Cybereason here is, and because I don't know a better term for it, I just called it dehorning. So yeah, I guess if you want to go ahead and throw that up as I look up Cybereason's funding history. So Crunchbase is typically where I go to see this stuff. Cybereason has raised $850 million, almost $1 billion, and wow. They were a unicorn. Trying to remember what their valuation was. Actually, the story might tell us what they were written down from.
Looks like 2.7 billion, according to Delaware Stock Authorization Form, first noticed by NASDAQ Private Market.
Oh, that graphic. Unicorn crying. Oh my God. If you're listening to the audio version of this, you might want to just, pick up and jump to 9 minutes in or wherever we are just to see this poor unicorn. Oh no. But yeah, 2.7 billion. And so what a 90, you pull out my calculator. So a 90%. Oh, okay. Right. Yeah, I should have been able to do that in my head. You basically just move the decimal point, and yeah, from 2.7 billion to 270 million. So that means Cybereason is way upside down on their funding. They're worth basically a third of the funding that they've raised. That's not a good situation to be in.
Not at all. We were just talking about Cybereason recently in the past month or so about other investments that came into it. So it was looking like it was pretty solid, but I guess not.
They're worth less than their Series F. And that wasn't even their most recent series. Basically, SoftBank, who was their Series E lead investor, threw another 100 million at them, which I guess is what SoftBank does. They throw good money after bad. But and that's so SoftBank has thrown a total of 400 million at them. No, I take it back. 460 million, almost $500 million.
And about half of what they raised, right?
About half of what they've raised, more than half. So there's got to be a deeper story here, because Cybereason seemed like they're doing pretty well for a while. I don't know where things derailed there. I'm sure there's a lot of insider knowledge. I didn't go out looking for rumors and stuff like that. I didn't do a bunch of searching on this, but certainly part of this is the market, right? Like we knew all these companies got a haircut when the whole market got one. We saw anywhere from 70 to 90% loss of valuation on public companies in the public market. And so we assume that to some extent that's going to affect the private market as well, because a lot of your exits are to these companies who are public. So yeah, not a good sign. Hoping that's more the exception than the rule here. We also have another example here of somebody who's way upside down on their money raised, and that's number 17, ZeroFox acquiring Looking Glass. So Looking Glass got picked up for $23 million on $119 million raised. So again, that's what, like a fifth of what they raised is what they exited for.
I don't necessarily.
So ZeroFox looking for bargains,
or at least I'm hoping this is not a sign of things to come. But I do think just the cybersecurity market was so overvalued. Could it come back? Yeah, absolutely, it can. It's not like security has been impacted in the way that a lot of other industries have been impacted. But I think the key here is just that there's a little bit of a reckoning, because there were a few really, really cushy years. And certainly something like Cybereason, seeing that, or even seeing Looking Glass, it's a little disheartening, but it should be a wake-up call. And we talked about this before, for companies to really think about, when they do get money, when they do get funding, when they do get support, even when they do get clients, if they're growing more organically, be careful, because I think some companies have, whether it's happening publicly or privately, have had the rug pulled out from under them. And you just have to be really careful these days. And I think, unfortunately, there were probably a lot of companies in 2021, 22 who spent way more on things that they didn't need to spend on. And it's all coming back a little bit. And it's unfortunate, because the employees are going to pay the biggest price. There will still be founders and investors who are insulated from that a bit. But there are plenty of good CEOs out there as well. And hopefully this is a lesson to just be a little more fiscally conservative, even in the boom years.
And we're seeing a lot of executives swapped out as well. We're seeing a lot of CEOs get swapped out at different organizations right now, and over the last 6 months.
And Adrian, according to the article you linked to, the deal of ZeroFox buying Looking Glass was mainly in stock, 9.4 million shares, combined with convertible debt and cash. So it's not even like they were fronting a bunch of money to the point that money is tightened and there's not as much money that these public companies or larger companies have to actually make these acquisitions.
And ZeroFox is on a short list of companies that are potentially going to be in danger of getting delisted. So they're on the NASDAQ, and they've been hovering just over $1, which is getting pretty close to where IronNet was a little while ago. They got warnings that they would get delisted unless things changed, and then they got an influx of money, raise some debt. But it's I'm not quite sure how an acquisition makes sense when you're already kind of in that position. But yeah, I think ZeroFox went public via SPAC, and most of the IronNet did as well. And generally, that's just not been going well, even outside security. Any companies that went public via SPAC, a lot of them have, popped right back off of the public market or gone under. So it's not great outcomes for that. And we don't really see anybody going public via SPAC anymore, or anybody going public for that matter. Not in this market, at least. Let's see. So more positive stuff. There's still a ton of companies getting funding. Companies coming out of stealth. Companies raising money. We've got lots of seed fundings here. Series A. Probably too many to talk about all of these, but if there's any particular ones that are interesting, we can zoom in on maybe one or two of these. Halcyon, so number 3, $50 million Series A funding. That's a huge Series A round. I'm just not a big fan of the approach. When I read their marketing and the press release, it just sounds like they're out to solve the ransomware problem of 2017 and not today's ransomware problem, which is and this pairs pretty well with an essay that I don't usually include stuff that I write here, but it's relevant. So number 28, my essay that ransomware is irrelevant. My point being, if you focus your solution on the actual lever that they use to make you pay the ransom, the extortion lever, that's typically the easiest thing for the attackers to change. So you're focusing the bulk of your efforts and resources and spending on the easiest things for the bad guys to change. And they've already done it. They've already started moving away from encrypting files, and they just steal your files. And based on what they find in there, maybe they attack your partners or other companies or employees directly. They threaten to release the files. I mean, this is just not keeping up with the current state of this. And they can shift again. There's other levers that they can use to make you pay. If they hack your cloud and just change all your credentials and hold your credentials hostage, like there's, they don't even have to use malware in a situation like that.
Yeah, I mean, the conversation around ransomware is always interesting to me. Certainly, I'm on calls with customers and get asked about how do we protect against ransomware, and ultimately, especially in today's enterprise networks, the answer is very similar to how I'd protect against anyone attacking me, anyone that gets access to my environment, be it a run-of-the-mill attacker, a crimeware syndicate, or an APT. So ransomware is just, for me, it's the difference between those is it really comes down to what is the end game or the end goal of it. Certainly, any attacker is going to be looking at how can I get access, how can I expand my access, and how can I persist in the environment. Those are often the things that are done. And then ransomware's aspect or end goal from there is going to be around how can I extort money from this organization. And like you said, Adrian, it evolves from I can encrypt everything and lock everyone out from everything until you pay, or I can go ahead and just take a whole bunch of your sensitive data and hold on to it and say, all right, either you give me this money or I'm going to release it to the world. Or I can just shut down and keep access from you from your network. I put together a talk for Black Hat and DEF CON years ago with a red teamer for Fortune 1 and a mainframe hacker, and we really focused on kind of the diehard scenario of a fire sale, which is basically you take down everything at once. So we had designed the talk around hypothetical ransomware that could be used, that could be deployed across every endpoint within an organization through Active Directory to include the mainframes and non-Windows devices, and be able to time it in such a way that everything would be locked out and all access to that environment, to also include the cloud environment, would be held by the attacker in such a way. And we had walked through and talked through this. It wasn't accepted. I think there's a number of reasons why it wasn't accepted. First of all, it was a very big topic, and there were a lot of aspects to talk through. But the reality of it is, what is a ransomware actor doing in that situation? Well, they're either keeping access away from legitimate admins, the folks that actually work for the organization and get paid to work there, versus this sort of outsourced control of this environment that could then be sold or brokered to someone else, which could actually go to a ransomware actor. So from the perspective of security, I agree with you, Adrian. If we just focus on ransomware, we're not solving exactly the right problem, because all of these attackers are leveraging the same techniques, They are getting execution running on a system, which looks like Halcyon is trying to focus on. But we've had EDR for years. That hasn't stopped it. There's a lot of different ways to bypass security software. That's why you have layers. We've got to have defense in depth on these things. We can't just try to stop execution. We can't just stop lateral movement. We can't just limit access to privileged systems or privilege access to systems in the environment. We've got to do something across each of those areas, which I think is part of the reason why we've had such a hard time. Very few organizations actually have network and host isolation protections around lateral movement. This is one of the reasons why attackers continue to gain access. We do Active Directory security assessments all the time, and pretty much every one of them, there are service accounts and accounts that have highly privileged access that don't need them with old passwords.
I like how you said host isolation and you didn't say the buzzword. You didn't use the term.
We all know what term that is. But hey, maybe if you combine World Password Day with that, we have a good start to solving the ransomware problem.
Yeah, so I didn't include it here, but my good friend Ed Rojas put together, what did he call it? It was the cloud or the ransomware security index. Is that what it was? It's RCM. Anyway, he created a matrix, basically. Let me just look for ransomware matrix. Adrian researching in real time. Yeah, I'll find it. But basically, he took the attack matrix, the MITRE attack matrix TTPs that were most highly associated with ransomware, which a lot of them have nothing to do with the malware, right? Like it's phishing, it's initial access vectors, it's the vectors they use for pivoting and things like that. A lot of it has nothing to do with that final step, which is
right.
Using the malware to automatically to automate deploying to as many systems as possible, and then doing whatever damage causes the ransom to be paid. But yeah, he just created like, here's the foundational stuff you need to do to be prepared for ransomware. And just as kind of like a cheeky take on it, he also has an advanced version and then a version he calls elite. And in the elite version, it's nothing but trolling. It's like using blockchain for security and like just ridiculous things he has in that one. And the point he's trying to make is, look, most of the stuff you need to do, to Katie's point, are pretty basic, that are going to protect you from a lot of these attacks. And people just sidestep it and they're going to go for Halcyon, right? They're going to go for some kind of diet pill to solve their problem.
Yeah,
well, that sort of leads into one of the other stories you posted about the RSA wrap-up that somebody tweeted about. I can't find it on this list right now, but it ties into the whole thing where there are just a lot of buzzwords, and you go to RSA and there are 400 plus vendors and everybody's got to sign and everybody's going to solve your problem in a new, unique, different way. And the fact of the matter is no one vendor is going to solve all your problems. And yet we still continue to have these shows where product vendors are trying to sell that idea. And it's not. Security is like so many other fields where it's step by step, it's multi-layered, just like Sean said. And every year we go to RSA and Black Hat and all of the other, however many conferences and their vendors, and we get enamored with the new shiny object or even the new features in an old, less shiny object. But it's still a landscape. You have to have a landscape because you have to focus on the different layers. You have to account for accidents. You have to account for attackers being smart. And now, just to make Adrian happy, I'll say you have to account for attackers using AI to execute their attacks. And it's not just, oh, let's start with the basics. It's start with the basics. It's putting that emphasis on the start and then layering up from there. That's so, so important. And we've been saying it forever in security, but it's not easy to do. I'm not saying that at all, but it really is. Start with the basics, because that's where you're going to get your best coverage, but you still have to go through all the steps, all the vendors, all of the internal policies and controls, and watching and waiting and responding and all of that. And if you tie that into RSA, people come out of RSA thinking like, oh, this is great, I learned about all these new products. Well, make sure you've covered step 0 before you go to step 3, 4, 5, or whatever down the line.
Exactly. And that's the point of this tool, which I did find called the ransomware control matrix, is to help you focus on what basic gaps you have before you get lost in stuff that's you shouldn't even be thinking about unless you get those done. Sorry, Sean, go ahead. You have to take here.
So yeah, security is foundational. So it starts with these things that we've talked about forever: patching, ensuring that only systems that should talk to each other. Workstations shouldn't be accessible on the network for anyone to connect to them. So, just blocking SMB connections to workstations will block 90+% of the lateral movement that's out there, but it's rarely done because it's something that could break something else. And, one of the things that I've talked about for years is that you're not going to get fired for making sure that everything works when things are connected to it. You might get in trouble if you start locking things down and someone can't do their job or can't connect to something that they need to. So therefore, people aren't incentivized to identify and improve the security in the environment for the most part. So it's a challenge when it comes to these things, because we sort of know what attackers are doing at least at a broad scale and scope of it. But when it comes down to the details of what to do, it can get a bit confusing. At Trimark, we created a ransomware resilience program and service that we've worked with customers on, and it really comes down to limiting access to systems, limiting access to accounts with privileged rights, ensuring that the appropriate auditing is flowing into a central monitoring system in order to even detect those things, because a lot of environments don't have appropriate logging, can't even see that. We were having a conversation earlier with the team about VMware and how you need a certain license in order to get logging from your VMware environment into a VMware system to then go to the SIEM. And one of the environments we've assessed recently only had half of their VMware servers that were being logged and captured by that system. And there's, if you reach out to a company that does pen testing and red teaming, they will talk to one of the good ones. They will talk to you about the maturity of your security organization. Are you ready for a pen test? Are you ready for a red team? You should have these things in place before you even go to that step. I think it's the same thing with the security products. Before you start trying to solve things by writing a check to a company, you start looking at your environment and identifying, okay, are we handling these things appropriately? Are we looking at the right things? How are we handling identity security? Where's our infrastructure? Where are our systems? Jumping a bit ahead, there's a list of things as part of this news article about Mandiant's, Kevin Mandia, the Mandiant CEO, 7 tips for cyber defense, and he hits on some of these things, including asset inventory.
Yep. Yeah, and it's I'm curious to get Katie mentioned AI in the same breath as ransomware, and there's actually a post I'm working on, and I'm curious to get both of your takes on it. But when you're pen testing, and I wonder if this is the case with you, Sean, you kind of get this idea of like, why isn't everybody just getting owned all the time? And the only answer that I've come up with is there's just not enough attackers to take advantage of the target rich environment that's out there. And I really, when I started looking at Auto GPT, I started thinking, and if you're not familiar with Auto GPT, it's basically like you create a goal that the AI has to hit, and the AI basically asks itself questions and kind of spits off different threads to do different things. And it can have access to plugins to do all kinds of things. And the idea is a complex task can be broken down into subcomponents and tackled, and the AI will just keep at it until it succeeds indefinitely if you let it. And I started thinking about all the steps of a ransomware case and thinking, like, even down to the negotiation on the price to pay. I don't think there's a single piece of it that AI and various pre-built automations and scripts and things like that couldn't handle. So I'm really worried about like the skills gap, I guess you could call it, or the labor challenge that the bad guys have. I worry that AI could potentially solve that problem for them, and they could more advantage of all the low-hanging fruit out there that we know is out there.
Absolutely. I mean, at Trimark, we're doing security assessments and looking at Active Directory, Azure AD, VMware, and every assessment we go into, we find things that attackers could leverage. In some environments, really, really bad things that we feel like if this environment's not already compromised, then the attackers missed it, like you said, Adrian. There's not enough attackers for environments. But certainly, it's security to a certain extent has always been this kind of concept of we don't necessarily have to outrun the bear, but outrun the person that we're with. Unless maybe it's a cocaine bear, in which case, you're not going to outrun that bear. So it is an issue of that. There are a lot of issues in a lot of environments, many of which are similar and the same. That's why we published some information on our website about how to find these things and find the low-hanging fruit in Active Directory. But it is a challenge because organizations are dealing with the same sort of things that they've been dealing with for a while. But a lot of times the shift in order to improve security comes from a shift in the mentality of how operations is done. We can't have our admins on a workstation anymore that's managed by everything in the environment. Why? Because that's how ransomware compromises the environment. We can't have service counts, 40 service counts that are 80 admins anymore because ransomware is going to leverage one of the service counts that has a password that hasn't been changed in 15 years. And these sort of things continue to be out there. And then the question is, well, why are they still there? We talk to companies where they don't have one person that manages AD. They've got a person that manages AD and Azure AD and Azure and AWS and all these other things. And they're fighting fires and managing the system and keeping it working. And at a certain point, that person's working 50 hours a week. They don't have time to track what the latest security issue is or what's going on with that. And so the organization ends up going, okay, instead of getting someone to help manage this environment, let's go ahead and buy this product, which will help manage the security of it, which doesn't exactly do it. And then there's this thought that, okay, if we manage and we follow these compliance frameworks, if we apply CIS baselines on this environment, then that will help us get to a better security environment. It will to a point, but the things that attackers are leveraging and compromising are not necessarily those things that compliance frameworks actually solve. So we have a gap between compliance and what attackers are doing, and we have a gap in the way that we've been doing security for years. A lot of it comes down to looking at these systems, identifying what the weaknesses are, and putting together remediation plans to get those done and prioritizing them. And in order to do so, leadership has to be a stakeholder, has to be one of the ones that is part of this initiative, behind the initiative, understands that some of the operations will slow down, understands that there will be some difficulties in doing this. Like Katie said, it's not easy. The fundamentals, the foundational things are not easy, but they are critical in moving the needle when it comes to the security posture of an organization.
Yeah, and you're mostly talking about internal systems as well. Like you start to get into, and I think one of the interesting things here that I love about the philosophy of the company that I joined, Valence, is like we've been saying, the priority is for things to work. It's availability over vulnerability, and and things get created, and more things get created, and more things get created, but not a lot gets removed. Like how often do these administrators have time to go do cleanup rounds, right? Like how many file shares are open that don't need to be open? How many are everyone full control? How many service accounts are effectively dead and should be removed, and they're just a risk to the organization? And you get into the SaaS world, and it's even worse because those admins, like maybe it's the head of HR, who decided to adopt some kind of HR SaaS. Like IT doesn't even know they're using it. Security doesn't even know they're using it. This SaaS stuff gets adopted, and even when it's centralized in IT, like Office 365 and Google Workspace, the average user has so much power to share files, to share entire folders with folks. And again, you end up with does your employee sunset process also turn off all sounds? Or are you aware, that they had a Notion account and that they integrated that Notion with Google Drive, and now anybody with that OAuth token from Notion can also get into all your Google Drive files. So it's even more complex with the addition of SaaS on top of all the old world technology.
Absolutely. And the defaults there are not as secure as they should be because you can share externally. I mean, we've had issues with Amazon S3 buckets for years, right? And the platform is there to share. It's there to enable users to share that information. Microsoft certainly has configurations settings to reduce and restrict how people can share, especially external to the organization. Those are typically not configured based on what we see in Azure AD assessments. And then the other part of it is, Adrian, to your point, if someone in HR has admin rights to the SaaS system, they're probably connecting into it, authenticating, logging into it from their same web browser that they use for Facebook, TikTok, Reddit, whatever else that people are on. And the chances and opportunities of an attacker to get them to a watering hole, aka a location or a website that the attacker has some sort of control of, is fairly high, where then the attacker can compromise that browser, extract the token associated, the session token associated with that SaaS service, and then jump in and have full admin rights on that, extract all the data from the SaaS service, and because of how SaaS and clouds works, very often can get the user to accept an application having rights to it permanently. And that application very often is attacker owned. And that's through some of the more well-known sort of OAuth attacks that have been around there for years, regardless of who the cloud vendor is.
Yeah, and a lot of it's just hygiene. Like we found, like 90% of the time when an individual shares a file, somebody needs access to it once and never again. But that share stays open indefinitely in most cases. So like the default from Google Workspace, like you should have to do something extra to keep a share open indefinitely. By default, it should be open for like 24 hours, or, for after the first time somebody accesses it, it's no longer available or something like that. Because that's the actual common use case is I need access to this file once and then I'm done.
And a lot of those links are discoverable through a number of cloud services. So if they're not password protected, or like you said, if they don't have a predefined expiration, I mean, 30 days seems reasonable in most cases, then it's definitely could be exposure to very sensitive information. I mean, we've been Google dorking for 20 years now plus, thanks to Johnny Long, and searching Google looking for in-file type PDF passwords, things like that. I mean, we're getting to the point where the same thing could be done with these cloud services and these SaaS services, exposing that information. And then when you layer in leveraging AI for those things, it gets pretty interesting, because you could use something like AutoGPT to start mining for things and looking for things in environments.
And now with AI, and AI having plugins to connect it to the internet, it could potentially get even easier to create AI dorks to find things. Because I found with search engines, there's so many things I can find using ChatGPT that I cannot find using Google, because Google has this recency bias, right? Like it always wants to show you something brand new as possible. So if you're looking for something older, it can be very, very difficult to find it. But with ChatGPT, it doesn't have that recency bias. It's not designed to be a search engine. So there's, and I noticed with Bing, for example, Bing will automatically include links to references when you ask it a question, and it gives you an answer. And I'm just waiting for the time that the reference it gives me is somebody's private file that shouldn't have been shared.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the thing that humans aren't always great at is correlation, right? AI, computer-based systems, ML can be really good at correlation. So we are quickly moving to the point where AI could actually do Google searches, correlate that with DNS, open source intelligent, or OSINT searches around an organization, and then incorporate in Shodan information about in the IP ranges of what the organization or the company actually has exposed publicly to the internet, and then incorporate some other information about what IP addresses they typically have, and then start mining websites for email addresses that where people have posted on different websites like Stack Overflow, and start building a model around, okay, how could I attack this organization based on Stack Overflow posts and posts in Reddit and elsewhere. I know they're running this technology stack based on DNS queries and text records. They have these sort of things that are in place, and build out effectively an attack plan against it, and then can build a fish around that and probably even send it to that organization. So yeah, when you talk about AI being able to take it to that last mile, yeah, we're very close, if not already there.
Yeah. All right, that was a rabbit hole, but I think it was a good rabbit hole. That was good to get into. Any of the other funding items here? I see that SemGrep, they closed the Series C, and SemGrep, I think is doing some great work. Have a lot of cool features that we talk about them. I feel like at least once every couple of months they have something new and notable worth talking about. So it's good to see, that's money well spent. I think that's a good investment. And let's see. Let's maybe move beyond the funding and M&A. Like I'll just mention Akamai Technologies picked up Neosec, which seems like it's also, from according to rumor, maybe not the greatest pickup. I think they had raised $21 million, and the rumor is that the acquisition was low double-digit millions. But we'll probably find out when Akamai's next quarterly filing comes out, and we'll get the actual amount on that. But yeah, not upside down though, so that's good. And then Yubico, I don't understand this merger. And I haven't had time to read into it too deeply, but I mean, it kind of sounds like a SPAC. Like they're going public through a merger with a company called a Swedish holding company called ACQ Burr. That's currently traded on NASDAQ Stockholm, which Yubico is. I think they're also based in that part of the world, but yeah, it kind of sounds like a SPAC. But I've not heard of SPACs happening in other parts of the world, so I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, at first glance, it looks like a play to get into that, be publicly traded pretty quickly and easily without going through the other parts of the process.
Yeah, that's what a SPAC is. So it's a Swedish SPAC. Are there Swedish SPACs? It's an SPAC. I cracked myself up. All right. So First Republic Bank, larger than Silicon Valley Bank, basically failed, and it has been seized by the FDIC. And I didn't even hear, I found it when I started going through research for the show, but I'm surprised I heard nothing about this after everybody losing their minds with Silicon Valley Bank. They're not much bigger, but they are bigger than Silicon Valley Bank. Why do you guys think this isn't a bigger story, or maybe I'm just completely out of touch with my sources?
It didn't. You're right. It didn't hit the headlines as much, from what I saw as well. I don't know why it didn't necessarily, but I think a lot of people were really surprised about Silicon Valley Bank, even though maybe they shouldn't have been. And once people got their hands around what happened, why it happened, how it happened, it was kind of an awakening, like, oh gosh, this is going to happen to other banks. I remember having that exact conversation with somebody who works in banking, who was like, oh no, this is one-off. This is not going to happen. Well, of course the banking world is saying that, but I think a lot of the rest of the world looked at that and said, yep, this is just the first of many. That doesn't necessarily mean this doesn't deserve as much attention, because I think it does. I think when the banking world does things that are eventually going to impact everybody, and it will. This isn't just, okay, the people who have money in First Republic. There is definitely a trickle-down effect or a trickle-out effect. But I think a lot of people were probably kind of waiting to see who's next after that whole Silicon Valley, and there was another one that went along with it too. I just think it's like, oh, okay, yep. Mm-hmm. Here's the third one. What's next? Who's next?
It's Silver something. I forget the name of the. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, and even the fact that we don't even remember who the second one was is kind of telling.
Well, so this is the first one that I've seen that isn't a specialized bank, though. So most of the depositors for Silicon Valley Bank were, investors, founders, startups, kind of revolved around the whole startup ecosystem. So you had a very homogenized depositor list of depositors, which is generally something, everything big finance related should be diversified, right? For risk reasons. And the other one that went under was highly focused on cryptocurrency. So both of them, you're like, yeah, okay, I can see that. But First Republic Bank is, to my understanding, like that's just like your general consumer, small business, regional style bank, right?
But it's still not a surprise if we look at what happened in 2008, 2009, and everything. That was a systemic bank failure. The banks are fully responsible. They didn't have to pay the price like so many other people. So, where there's smoke, there's fire. This is definitely going to happen, and it's not just predicated on something like an SVB that was not diversified. It is. If we don't know about it yet, it's coming.
So this was also
there's certainly newer indicators here too. So it says in the article that First Republic reported losing about 40% of its deposits in the first quarter of the year, and then later on it says right, and later it says among medium-sized banks, First Republic was most affected by the trend. As of mid-March, about 70% of its deposits were uninsured, according to Bank of America, meaning they were larger than the FDIC's 250,000 guaranteed limit, which the article further says that compares to the median of 55% uninsured deposits for medium-sized banks and the third highest level after SVB and Signature Bank. So SVB, Signature, and now First Republic all had a high level of uninsured deposits. So now we have a key indicator that we can look at to go, all right, these are the things that we need to have concerns about when it comes to banks and banking. Kind of like in 2008, a lot of that was related to highly risky investments, like mortgage bundles that were put together that didn't really have, that weren't valuable from at least from the perspective of, were these good investments because this mortgage was set up for someone that was making $30,000 but had a mortgage for $500,000 a year, or $500,000 for this house. Looking at where we were then, looking at where we are now, it's very similar. But now we have some key indicators that we look at. Who's the number 4 behind First Republic? Who's number 5 behind them as far as these uninsured deposits go?
Yeah, and if we're seeing, this is just the start. We're going to see several more before hopefully Congress steps in and starts making some more rules, because, when the banking sector fails, the little person pays. It's not the banking executives. I mean, yeah, sure, a couple of people went to jail based on, the mortgage crisis and all that, but it's still a systemic issue.
I don't think anybody went to jail.
I think it was Goldman, someone from Goldman. I don't remember, but
there might have been fines.
In general, the executives got to keep their jobs, their salaries. The money that was paid out by Congress was used to fund executives' vacations and yachts and et cetera, et cetera. And the people making $30,000, $50,000 a year at the low levels, they were the ones who couldn't get their jobs back. They were the ones moving back in and living in their cars. So
I think they got golden parachutes, most of them.
So,
I think it was the opposite.
According to Wikipedia and the New York Times, only one top banker went to jail, and that was Kareem's Sarah Geldin, who was a former executive at Credit Suisse, sent to jail time as a result of the financial crisis of 2007 to 2008. A conviction resulting from mismarking bond prices to hide losses.
Mm.
So one person.
Wow. All right, let's grab a few more before we wrap up here. I think we're right around or coming close on the hour mark here. You found one of these 25 and 26. We've got a few items about breaches. I just want to say something real quick about the Mandia one. This is a real trend we've seen where an employee is tricked into installing some kind of malware, typically through, I don't know where this one came from, but in the past they were from sponsored Google links that would send you to tampered versions of popular software like Open Broadcasting, I think is what it's called, OBS software that gives you like an overlay for video streaming. That's widely used. But yeah, in this case, it was the Xtrader application. So very interesting trend here. And we've seen sometimes when this happens, they'll steal all your cookies and they'll get into some of your SaaS products. That's how I think attackers got into EA last year. A lot of lapses, breaches, took advantage of stuff like that. But Sean, the one you're really interested in, I think, was the next one, right? The SolarWinds?
Yeah, absolutely. With DOJ detected the SolarWinds hack 6 months earlier than first disclosed. So it said that, according to the article, in May 2020, the U.S. Department of Justice noticed Russian hackers on its network, but did not realize the significance of what it found for 6 months. Apparently, they had run a trial of the Orion software through SolarWinds, and then subsequent to that, started seeing some unusual activity in their environment. Was brought in Mandia to look at that, brought in Microsoft to try to figure out what was going on. Didn't necessarily get a solid link between the two because they did end up buying the software, but it reached out to SolarWinds about it, but at the time SolarWinds didn't know anything about what was going on. DOJ told Wired, the company that published the article, that it notified the U.S. Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency, or CISA, about the breach at the time it occurred. And there was some, it seems like this is one of those things where if these two people had talked, then maybe something else would have happened. But it was like the timeline is that the DOJ had identified this, Mandiant was there, Microsoft was there, they had talked to SolarWinds about it, but maybe not to the right person. SolarWinds checked, they didn't see anything that looked unusual in their system, but maybe didn't go through it all the way to check it because they're like, all right, well, it might not be our stuff. So, of course, SolarWinds issue being the thing where the compiling software was what was breached and compromised, where everything that got built, all the source code that ran through the build and compiling system would include backdoors and this additional malicious code that automatically went out to all the SolarWinds customers. So it says that right around the time the DOJ discovered the anomalous traffic exiting its Orion server, which was around that time when the tainted software went out. And then Mandia itself got infected with Orion software in July 28, 2020, which is after this May timeframe that DOJ had initially seen this. So it's almost like there was some information that was seen, then it was seen at Mandia, and then it started building steam. We're like, maybe this is a problem. Maybe we can tie this directly to the Orion software on the SolarWinds side and be able to work through that and fix it. So to me, it's very interesting. It's one of those things like there was a book that's been out for quite a while called The Cuckoo's Egg by Cliff Stahl, and it's about how he identified an accounting error, and because of the accounting error, he identified that there were attackers on his network, and this is in like the 70s. So pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, I don't think it was quite that far back. I think it was late 80s, maybe. Cuckoo's Egg when that happened.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
Anyway, but yeah, point aside, Yes, this is really interesting, right? Because part of the national cybersecurity strategy is about better data sharing between organizations. And if anybody's going to be, the example of that, it should be DOJ, should be, some of these public government organizations. So,
right. And the article even says that a DOJ notified CISA, but when the NSA was asked about this, they expressed frustration that they weren't also notified. So,
and SolarWinds. Right. They notified SolarWinds, and SolarWinds looked around. They're like, "Yeah, no, everything's cool over here." So it is the same thing we saw with Equifax, right? Like Equifax knew about the vulnerability that eventually hit them, but they didn't have the skills to find it in their own environment and uncover it. So, like, this is a key thing. Like, so many cases, defenders have the tools they need, and they have the funding they need. But practicing with those tools to make sure that these security products work the way they think it works, or if it's a tool that they have to manually use to scan something to try and find a vulnerability or an issue, there's some practice that you just need to have confidence with that tool and know that you'll be able to find evidence of an attack or whatever that tool is supposed to find.
And the scale of SolarWinds is still staggering. It said that the software served about 18,000 of its customers. The tainted software went on to affect at least 9 U.S. federal agencies, among them the Department of Justice, Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, Treasury Department, as well as top tech and security firms, including Microsoft, Mandia, Intel, Cisco, and Palo Alto Networks. That's
why SolarWinds was targeted, right?
And they had on their website, these are the companies we work with. These are the customers we have.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that's going to be an ongoing issue, as we see trends come and go in the market, still people and process is the missing piece here. And that's something that, and we actually have more and more companies now, both through services and products that help you get some practice and simulate incidents and, make sure that folks know how to find things, how to run incidents, how to, better set up their systems to be able to discover attackers and evidence. But I think we're still way far from where we should be. And we got to get there quick, with this, before the bad guys figure out how to use AutoGPT to automate ransomware.
I mean, the thing is, there are a lot of great tools and I think people have the best of intentions, and then they're overwhelmed with all of the other stuff that they have to do, and they're gambling on the fact that, okay, maybe it won't happen to us.
Yeah, there's no shortage of distractions, for sure. Yeah, it takes leadership that are very focused on, okay, we're going to get these basics done, like the most boring stuff. There's still 100 people that don't have MFA enforced. Well, we're going to make that our priority instead of, exploring DSPM or whatever it is. All right. A bunch of AI trends in here. There's a great one on prompt injection, number 34. That's something I think worth learning about, as we're going to see more and more use of AI here. Doesn't really have a clear solution. So yeah, definitely check out story number 34. And that's from a guy named Simon Willison. Some really good thoughts there about different ways that prompt injection can work. And also, I think, Sean, you mentioned story number 36, which is Threat Prompt, one of my new favorite newsletters by Craig Balding, talking about how to avoid leaking PII to ChatGPT, suggests tokenization, stuff like that. Basically replacing your sensitive data with data that's, just manufactured, so that when you enter your prompt, you're not entering any of that sensitive data, but then you can take the output and you can swap it on your own system, swap it back to whatever that data was.
Right, and that's become a big issue, especially given how much data you can actually give to ChatGPT in a prompt now. You can give it entire documents, entire contracts. Say, here, read through all this. And part of the reason why people use ChatGPT and AI is to solve repetitive tasks that take a lot of time. Reading through those takes a lot of time. You have to read through it to identify PII in order to then get to it. Maybe what we need is a local AI that can go through and identify PII before then submitting it to the actual larger LLM.
Gotcha. Yeah. And another trend here is companies charging for scraping and learning on their data, using their data for large language models. I think Reddit was the first to say, hey, F you, pay me. And then Twitter, Stack Overflow. So it's going to be really interesting because I don't think OpenAI even gets that data directly. I read that there was some small German company that I'd never heard the name of, that they actually get their the data for training the models. So that's a whole business, is just providing this raw data for companies that want to train large language models. So just big old piles of text. That's the business model.
Yeah, and 33 talks about dangers of using large language models before they're baked, with the fact that there's potential skewing of information depending on what the source is behind it.
Yeah. All right. Anything else you want to cover here before we hit the squirrel story and before I take us out here? Number 29 is a fun one. I feel like I'm featuring Kelly's essays all the time, but they're funny as hell. But Kelly Shortridge has one that says Sun Tzu would not like the cybersecurity industry. It's very, very spicy and very true. So that's recommend that read there. Anything else, Katie or Sean?
No, I think
No,
we've hit the highlights. I did mention number 40, Mike Prevet's review summary of RSAC. That gave me a good chuckle, so everybody should check that out.
Yep, that's a good one. Hey, it's all in a tweet too. It's very concise.
Very concise. It will take you a minute.
Yeah, but nailed it. Plenty of emojis. Very readable. It's my favorite.
Who knows? Maybe it was ChatGPT generated.
Well, we'll have to put it in our generator checker to see. Unless he put it in a generator checker obfuscator, in which case our generator checker will say that it didn't come out of a generative AI tool. Yeah, things are getting interesting. Yeah, so the last one here is I thought this was just a really useful, usually XKCD stuff. I mean, it kind of borders on just straight up wisdom and funny comics. But this one in particular is super useful. It's basically a grid that helps you calculate whether or not it's worth spending the time to automate something. So if it takes me 2 hours to create the automation, how much time does it need to save me for me to earn that time back, basically? Like, for the investment of my time to do the automation to be worth it. So I thought that was really cool.
That's a really good way to look at it, but I imagine that so much of it is person and scenario dependent, right? Like,
right.
At a very basic level, if you spend an hour creating something, creating an automation, and it saves you 2 hours of work, that's an easy calculation, right? That's pretty good. As you build out the amount of time it takes to create something, you might want to say, all right, it's just a simple calculation, but it's probably not. It's probably a lot more complex than that. And it depends also on whom it touches in the organization, how easily it can be used. Is it a one and done thing? Like if I create this automation, are we done? Probably not. It's probably just like any other technology that's going to require maintenance over the course of its usable lifetime. So yeah, really, really interesting topic that we haven't gotten into yet because everybody's still in the enamored phase of this. Like, oh, I can create this. This will be super fun. But at some point, there's going to have to be some look at the actual dollars and cents of it too.
Yeah. Yeah, and Trash Panda in the comments mentions, the potential efficiencies that you get, from every time you automate something. You're probably going to get faster and better at it. And there's probably maintenance that you have to do on some of these automations. But yeah, almost every time I've automated something, I've learned something useful that's helped me somewhere else. So that's something to take into account too. All right. With that, thanks so much, Katie and Sean, for joining me today. It's been a short but fun one.
Always good. Always good to see you and chat about 42 different news stories from the past 2 weeks.
Absolutely. I really enjoy talking about enterprise security stuff.
Yeah, me too. And big thanks to everybody watching or listening to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. We still do have those 6 micro interviews coming up. And we're going to do it all again next week. Same kind of layout throughout May, I think, pretty much. Bye-bye.